Today's question, is AI finding the project risks you're hiding? By the end of this session, you'll be able to proactively leverage AI tools to identify and assess project risks before your stakeholders ever do, while keeping your data under lock and key. PM Panda here, 2.5 decades delivering projects, PMP certified since 2003. I've seen teams celebrate being on schedule while the bank account bled out because they weren't looking at the right data. I've spent 25 years in the trenches, and if there is one thing I know, it is that an uninformed sponsor is a dangerous sponsor, but a sponsor who knows more than you do about your own risks is a career-ending nightmare. Let's make sure that never happens to you. Imagine walking into a steering committee meeting for a multi-million-dollar hospital expansion. You've done your homework, your status report is green, and you're feeling confident in your manual tracking. Then, your project sponsor leans forward and asks why you haven't addressed the 60% probability of a critical supply chain bottleneck in the HVAC system scheduled for 6 months from now. You blink because that's not in your risk register, and you certainly didn't see it coming. How do they know? They didn't have a vision, they simply ran your baseline schedule and vendor list through a predictive analytics tool over the weekend while you were at a barbecue. Suddenly, you look unprepared, out of touch, and worst of all, you've lost the trust of the executive leadership because you were reactive instead of proactive. They've found the unknown unknowns, those emergent risks you didn't even know were possible, using pattern recognition while you were still manually color-coding a spreadsheet. This is the new reality of project management, where your project data can either be your best friend or the smoking gun that proves you've missed something obvious. The solution isn't to work harder, it's to augment your own risk management processes by utilizing AI to analyze historical data and benchmarks before your sponsor beats you to it. To stay ahead, we have to talk about how we identify risks using AI as an augmentation tool rather than just a fancy search engine. In professional certification exams, we call this the identify risks process, but in the real world, it's about moving beyond brainstorming sessions where the loudest person in the room decides what might go wrong. AI algorithms can take your historical project data and industry benchmarks to spot potential threats and opportunities that human intuition often misses. It's like having a digital colleague who has read every project report ever written in your industry and can point out the invisible flaws in your current plan. Think of it as having a system that can look at your vendor history and tell you that every time you've used a specific contractor for a tech product launch, the integration phase has slipped by 2 weeks. This is predictive analytics in action, using machine learning to discover patterns and forecast future scenarios based on what has happened before. It's not magic. It's just the ability to process thousands of variables at once to see the forest and the trees simultaneously. By identifying these patterns early, you move from being a firefighter to being a strategist who sees the fire before the first match is even struck. Once we've identified these risks, we have to assess them, which usually involves guessing the likelihood and impact based on feeling. AI changes this from a gut feeling exercise into a data-driven science during the planning phase. By analyzing current and historical data, generative AI tools can help us quantify risks with much higher precision than any subjective scale. For example, if you are planning a global infrastructure project, AI can analyze weather patterns, local labor strike history, and shipping lane congestion to give you a percentage-based probability of delay that you can actually defend in a boardroom. This is where we move into the risk performance domain, looking at how threats, the bad stuff, and opportunities, the good stuff, affect our objectives. Instead of saying a risk is medium, the AI helps you understand that it has a 24% chance of costing you $50,000. This allows you to prioritize your response strategies based on actual math rather than just whoever is most worried that day. When you can tell a sponsor that a risk has a specific dollar value attached to it based on 10 years of industry data, your credibility goes through the roof. One of the most powerful applications is dynamic scheduling and managing schedule risk impact through network logic. AI uses pattern recognition to look at your schedule, specifically focusing on the inherent risks associated with branching and merging paths. If you have 3 different work streams that all need to finish at the exact same time for a massive software integration to begin, that's a merge point, and it's a massive risk magnet. AI identifies these potential scheduling conflicts by simulating thousands of what-if scenarios in seconds, showing you exactly where the chain is likely to break. It can tell you that while each individual task looks fine on your Gantt chart, the statistical probability of all three hitting the merge point on time is actually less than 10%. It doesn't just point out the problem, it can propose resolutions to minimize delays, like resequencing tasks or shifting resources before the bottleneck even forms. It's about seeing those emergent risks before they become known disasters on your critical path. You aren't just guessing the finish date anymore. You are calculating the probability of hitting it, which is exactly what a high-performing project manager does. But we have to be careful because using these tools carries significant risks of its own, primarily around data privacy. In professional circles, we call this responsible AI, and it's about adhering to policies that protect your intellectual property. The biggest mistake you can make is taking a sensitive project document full of proprietary client details or secret vendor pricing and pasting it into a free, public large language model. Once that data is in there, it is part of the public domain and could potentially be used to train the model for your competitors to see. You also have to watch out for AI hallucinations, where the tool confidently tells you a risk exists based on data it simply made up because it wanted to be helpful. Projects must have ethical use guidelines to ensure that while we are using AI to assist us, we aren't accidentally leaking our company's crown jewels or making decisions based on digital fiction. You need to treat AI output the same way you treat a rumor in the office. It's an interesting lead, but you need to verify the facts before you go reporting it to the steering committee. I remember a massive tech rollout I was supervising where the project manager was convinced everything was on track. We decided to run a sanitized version of the schedule through a predictive tool just to see what happened. The AI flagged a hidden supply chain risk that none of us had considered in our weekly meetings. It noticed that our secondary hardware supplier was located in a region about to enter a period of extreme seasonal monsoons, which historically delayed shipping by 3 weeks every single year for a decade. We hadn't even looked at the weather patterns of a sub-vendor 2 levels deep in the supply chain, but the AI saw the pattern instantly. Because the AI caught that connection, we were able to pivot to a local supplier before the contract was even signed. If we had waited for the human risk identification meeting, we wouldn't have found out until the hardware didn't show up in the middle of a storm. By then, the project would have been 6 figures over budget and a month behind, and I would have been the one explaining that failure to the board. Let's walk through a worked example of an international tech infrastructure launch. Imagine you are managing a massive schedule network involving 5 different global vendors. To get ahead of your sponsor, you decide to use an AI tool, but you do it the right way. First, you sanitize your data. You remove the names of the vendors, the specific project name, and any confidential pricing, replacing them with generic labels like Vendor A or Software Phase 1. You then feed this anonymized schedule data into the AI tool to find the patterns in the logic of your network. In our scenario, the AI scans the hundreds of dependencies and flags a high probability delay at the point where 3 critical paths merge during final testing. It calculates an 85% chance of a 2-week slip because of the high complexity of the handovers. Now, instead of panicking, you use the AI to run a what-if scenario. It suggests staggering the start dates of the testing phases by just 3 days each, which reduces the resource peak and brings the probability of delay down to 15%. You take this data, adjust your baseline, and then present a mitigated risk profile to your sponsor proactively. Let's talk about the mistakes that end careers, starting with uploading sensitive data. I once saw a healthcare IT rollout nearly collapse because a manager uploaded a spreadsheet containing strict patient confidentiality data into a public AI to help write a summary report. That is a massive confidentiality breach that leads to legal action and immediate termination. You must understand that public models are like a giant community bulletin board. If you wouldn't pin your project's secret budget or vendor contracts to the wall of a public library, do not put them into a free AI tool. The second mistake is blind trust in AI risk outputs. AI is a tool, not a crystal ball, and the computer said so is not a valid excuse when a project fails. It can and will make things up if it doesn't have enough data to give you a real answer. You must have subject matter experts. Your lead engineers and senior architects validate every single risk output the AI generates. You need to separate the genuine risks from the digital noise. If the AI says there is a risk of a blizzard in a tropical climate, you need a human to step in and call it out. Finally, don't skip the human element of risk management. AI is fantastic at augmentation and assistance, but it cannot manage people. You still need your interpersonal skills and stakeholder communication to actually implement the risk responses the AI suggests. An AI can tell you that your team is overworked, but it can't sit down with your lead developer, buy them a coffee, and figure out how to restructure their workload to prevent burnout. Risk management is 50% identifying the problem and 50% negotiating the solution with human beings. To wrap this up, remember that AI augments your risk identification by analyzing historical data and benchmarks to find patterns humans miss. It can spot hidden schedule conflicts in merging project paths, but you must always sanitize your data to prevent exposing sensitive information to public models. Always validate the machine's output with real humans to avoid acting on hallucinations or ignoring the people side of the project. Your next step is to take your current risk register, strip out the confidential details, and run it through an AI tool to ask for 3 potential blind spots you might have missed. If this helped, hit like so I know to make more, and subscribe for practitioner lessons every week.